Today is August 23rd, 2020. My name is Leo Valdez. I'm interviewing Alicia Frausto for the Rutgers, New Jersey History Project and the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Alicia, that this interview will be placed in the Rutgers Oral History Archives. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or discuss, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you would like to discuss, please make sure to bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we're not conducting this interview in person, I need to record your verbal consent. Voces will make your interview available online and also wishes to archive your interview. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. So I need you to respond to these 3 questions so we can proceed. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. 1, do you give Voces consent to archive your interview at the Rutgers Oral History Archive?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview?
Yes, I agree.
And do you allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you. So, Alicia, I wanted to start with you telling me a little bit about when you were born and what you know about your grandparents and your parents, about where they were born and where they grew up.
Sure. Okay, so I was born 1995 in Anaheim, California, in Southern California. My parents had actually immigrated to the United States before I was born. I don't think it had been that much time before they had immigrated. My parents are both from a really small rancho, or like the equivalent, like a village in Mexico, in like central northern Mexico. And I honestly didn't know how small this place was until I saw it for myself last December, so about 8 months ago. And that was 25 years into my life. So I grew up with the stories of what it was like to grow up in a rancho and how my parents had met there. I understood it was small. I didn't understand how small it was. And my mom, she hadn't had a job growing up. So her first job was actually here in the United States. And she's been at the job for the last 27 years. She's been the same job for her whole life. And my dad, he is actually 25 years older than my mom. And he has done multiple jobs, but in Mexico, he is what they call agricultor. So he's a farm worker. He works in agriculture because everyone in the rancho basically lived off the land. And so you own your piece of land, and then you build your house out of adobo, and you grow your own crops, and they have animals that they also use for food. That's a whole different thing. But so this was their life growing up, and they really grew up like 1 minute walking, less than a minute walking distance from each other's houses. And it's the type of community that's literally like now currently probably like about 100 people. There is not that many people at all. The church there is probably like the greatest like group event that happens in the rancho. And the last time when I went, they had maybe at most like 15 people attending the Sunday mass. My dad said that back, many years ago, that it used to be huge, like a huge festival, and there was definitely more than 100 people in the town. But since then, majority of people have immigrated to the U.S. So that's what I know about them. And then my grandparents, I never got to meet them. I apparently met my grandma when I was like 1 or 2, and she came to the US. But besides that, my mom's parents passed away when she was younger, so I never got to meet them. And then my dad's dad never traveled to the US, so I didn't meet him either. The only like elder that's older than my parents that I've met is I had an uncle who was my dad's uncle and my dad's aunt. So that's as much as I know really about my family beyond my parents' generation.
Do you know if your grandparents were also from the same area that your parents were from?
Yeah, it's just that is like if I had to like track where my parent like my where my family comes from, like that's where they've always been. Because you can't really like my parents were probably the first ones to make they made a huge move, but like everyone basically stays in the rancho. Like generations have been brought up there, and my parents were of the generation that started migrating to the US.
What? So, I want to talk a little bit more about that, but you said your dad was 25 years older than your mom?
Yeah, he is. So
Oh,
he's 80 this year,
oh
and
wow.
my mom is 55.
So, how did they start having a relationship and then decide to immigrate together?
Well, the rancho is so small, right? So everyone kind of knows each other. Um, and there aren't that many families. Like the families are very big. So my mom is one of 13 and my dad is one of 9. And so the families are very big, and like the family name in the rancho is like what kind of gets you around. Oh, you belong to all los Fraustos or all los Sernas, or like it's like that. So they met through mutual cousins, friends. Like, it's just so small. And they actually like had to fight, not fight, but like, see, because my dad was so much older, my mom had to convince her family that it was like, that she still wanted to be with this much older man. And my dad had to kind of like um convince their family like it's okay for her to come with me, and was like chasing my mom says that he was always chasing her, but I don't know what the true story is. But my dad would travel a lot back and forth between the US and Mexico, and he was part of like the Braceros program and other programs that happened like after, because he was born 1940, right? So in his like 20s, late 20s, he already was migrating to the US for different US programs. And then he would travel all through California, like usually doing agriculture work. And then he'd either gather some money and go back, or he'd send money back. And so in one of those trips of going back and forth between Mexico and the US, he asked my mom, well, will you come with me so we can like settle in the US? And then eventually she said, yeah. So she had me when she was 30. Yeah.
Are you their only child?
No, but I'm the oldest. So I have their first child, and then I have 3 younger siblings. Yeah.
That's a remarkable story. The Braceros program was really interesting. So your dad, I'm assuming he had like a work visa, like a temporary work visa.
hmm Yeah, he did. And my grandfather, he also told me how, like, my grandfather actually had traveled to California before too, during World War II, when a lot of, US people were sent to fight in the war. California needed more hands to gather food, and so they started, recruiting in Mexico. And so my grandfather had been in the U.S. doing agriculture, and he had also worked at like a medic camp, like taking care of the soldiers during the World War II, which I was like fascinating when I first learned about that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Wow. So your parents immigrated here around like 1994, like
Yeah, I think early 1990s.
or early 1990s. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And why did they settle in Anaheim?
I think there's a huge community of people from Zacatecas, Mexico, in Southern California, and specifically in Orange County. Um, but also at this point, a lot of their siblings had already migrated, their older siblings. Like all of my mom's sisters all lived there. So, and they all work together now. So when she came, she was looking for a job, and all her sisters already worked at this factory. So like, oh, you come work with us. And to this day, like, 27 years later, they all still work in the same factory from when she first migrated. And my dad's siblings are also mostly in Southern California if they haven't already passed away, or spread out into like the inland parts of California. They never want to leave California, and every time I've mentioned like why not consider other parts of the states, it's because one, their family's there, but also because my dad literally says he cannot like fathom living in a place where the weather is any different. Because and I until I went into Mexico and I saw where they're from, then I understood more why he was so attached to living in California. But it's because where they go, it's literally desert. It's like 45 minutes in one direction, desert, 45 minutes in the other direction, like all desert. And then this rancho, just literally where it would be like the middle of nowhere. And it's hot, and all you see is cactus and the agave and guava trees. Like that. And so when I saw it for myself, then I understood, oh, this is why you don't want to leave California, because they literally feel like, and I've started to understand that since moving to the East Coast, like when winter comes and my body like doesn't know how to like react, I think, well, my dad knew that of their own bodies. And I think of like, none of my ancestors have ever lived in such climates. They've come from a desert. So then it like makes sense to me why my body reacts. Like every single winter I get sick. And my first winter on the East Coast, I literally got pneumonia. So I figured it out why he never wanted to leave, but yeah, they're not going anywhere.
What factory does your mom and her sisters work at?
I don't feel like I should disclose.
Oh, okay, no problem.
Yeah, but the factory is it's like a typical like assembly factory, you know, where everyone's kind of lined up and you put together different pieces. So she's been working at that for 27 years.
Does she get pay?
No. So it's really frustrating, but um throughout her time there, the pay has always been whatever the minimum wage is. So currently I think it's 15 because that's the minimum wage down in Southern California. And so she's never had a pay raise in all of these years. She's always been whatever the minimum wage is. There has been no room for her to like move, and that's just where she's been. And she's not very fluent in English. She obviously doesn't know how to use a computer. And when she was applying for citizenship a few years ago, that was probably the most like formal education she was getting. Besides, both of my parents only studied till 6th grade back in the rancho. So since 6th grade, she hadn't had any type of formal education. She'd just been working in this factory. So when she had to study for the citizenship exam, she was like, it was her first time. Like she didn't understand like why. She'd be like, oh, they get mad at me when I like ask someone for help or I peek over at their paper. And I was like, Mom, because that's cheating. Like you're taking a test. But it's like she didn't have that. So I was like, okay, when you're in a classroom and you're taking a test, you can't ask someone else for help. You can't like peek over and like, look at what they're doing. She's like, well, I didn't know that. And I was like, yeah, well, she hasn't been in school since she was a kid. Yeah.
So she hasn't had the opportunities to look for other types of jobs, even if she wanted to? Does she want to?
She does want to. I mean, I think it was only recently with the pandemic that she even started to consider something else because, she's kind of been in this for so long. Like she loves her routine. That like she her job is straight down the street. Like you have to go like 30 minutes straight down the street, but it's like down the street from the house. And there was one time when the factory was thinking of relocating, not that far from where it is, but a different route. And she was so anxious. She was like, can you drive me to the other place? Like, I don't know. Because imagine you've been doing the same routine every single morning. She'll work no less than 5 days a week from like 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. And like she's just been doing this for so long that the thought of like moving the factory was making her so anxious. It's like, oh, I'm going to be late or I'm not going to be able to find it because she's been taking the same exact route for so long. But what was the question? I feel like
She works a 12-hour day?
no, she'll work between 8 to 10 hours, but she'll be up by like 5 a.m. to get to work and then won't get home till like 5 p.m.
Wow. And so your dad, where did you say he works now or has been since you all moved to Anaheim?
Well, when he moved to Anaheim, he was still in agriculture for some time. Then he was doing factory work. He was also a chef Mexican restaurants. He spent some time kitchen work, agriculture, factory jobs. Then when he turned 63, 65, he was forced to retire. And at the same time, it was not only was his retirement coming up, but my brother got really sick. And so he was spending the majority of the time at the hospital. And the employer was like, well, you can't have all this time off. But it's like somebody needed to be at the hospital with my brother. And his retirement was anyways coming up. So they laid him off. And this was all, I think, in 2008, when there was already like an economic crisis, you know. But since 2008 till now, was that how many years? Okay, all those years, the last 12 years, my dad, as much as he's retired, like has not stopped working. So after that happened, we went through like a series of different things that he would do. So he would like go dumpster diving. Like there was a point where we had so much like food insecurity, we were eating like Shakey's pizzas from the dumpster. That what my dad would go get. Or he'd be dumpster diving, collecting food, and then collecting cardboard, because at this time, like recycling wasn't that, like people weren't, I don't know, maybe it's different here, but like in California, you can like sell your recycling. In Philadelphia, like that, I haven't seen that. Like people, you know, the recycling programs have just now started becoming more thorough. And so back in California, you can sell your recycling. And at that time, it was just starting. So people weren't recycling. They were just kind of like throwing everything into the dumpsters. So my dad would gather all the cardboard and wooden pallets and cans, like all these things separately in his little truck, and then take them to a recycling center and then make money off of selling the recycling. So he did that for a while, and then he started mowing lawns. So he started his own like landscaping business, very small, but he's been doing that for the last 12. So he's 80 years old and he'll still mow like 3 lawns a day, which is like totally wrong. Like, you know, like I don't, and it's been years of me telling my dad, like, I don't want you to work anymore. Like, please stop working. But it's like when you have financial insecurity all the time, and you've been working your whole life, he's just like, I can't stop working. And for him, he also like tries to turn it around and be like, oh, it's good for my health, it keeps me active, which is true. But it's like you could be doing other things to keep you active. Like you don't have to be, what's the word in English, like pushing yourself, you know.
And you can say the words in Spanish if you want.
Okay, sí, pues like I'm saying, like he keeps like esforzándose like more than he needs to be, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's terrible.
Yeah.
What was it like for you growing up in Anaheim in this environment?
Well, I became an adult. Oh, I would say become an adult really young age. Because my parents were both working all the time. And at some point, like I was so sure that we were middle class, because we grew up like in a poor neighborhood. Also, I didn't come to know that I was poor until I was at the end of high school applying for college. So my understanding of my upbringing was that we were good. Like, you know, my dad would work 50, 60 hours a week. I didn't know what a work schedule was supposed to look like. And my mom was working 40 hours a week. And we had a babysitter who would come and make lunch for us and stay till one of my parents got home. So I thought, and we had a house. So I thought, because we have a house, we have a babysitter, you know, my parents both have a car, they both have jobs, like I was so certain like we're middle class, if not like, you know, we're good. And it's also because my friends and like the rest of my community, like a lot of folks lived in like 1-bedroom apartments or like studio apartment, single parents, had to ride the bus, like things that I measured as like, oh, like we're so good because, you know, we don't ride the bus and we have a house. But then when I was applying for college and I filled out the like financial aid forms, and I found out like my parents' joint income was like just about above 20,000, and I was like, and I saw that was for a family of 6. That is far below the poverty line. And I was like, oh shit, what? Like, we're poor. Like, I didn't know. And so when I was applying for college, I'm like, oh yeah, you can get all the waivers and you get free this and free that because of your income. It really shook my world, because up until this point, like, I didn't understand that was poverty, and I thought we had everything. So that was my upbringing. I was like, I just thought we had it all, and I didn't understand. Like, now seeing like that my mom hasn't had a pay raise through all these years and has always been on whatever the minimum wage is, I'm like, that is so highly problematic, like extremely problematic. Or the fact that my dad is still working at 80 years old. And also, like, once I was in high school and I started my own like financial literacy, increased because of college and everything, and seeing that, oh, we have a house, but it's because my parents are basically paying off this, not even paying off this mortgage. Like, the mortgage that they bought at like 200 something thousand, it's now over 300 something thousand, because what they've been paying for the last 25 years is barely the interest, not even the principal. But like, and every month it's a struggle to get that amount together. So I hadn't processed like, oh, actually we've been living in housing insecurity my whole life, and I didn't know these because my parents were handling it. And then when I got older and I was in college and I came home and I was like, I know all these things now. I was like, Mom, Dad, you can't do it like this, you can't. And then it was just, I came home with like such a sense of like, I know everything now. And it was like one day and my mom was just like, no, like, okay, you think you went to college and you know everything now? But she was like, we've been handling this for years, like while I was growing up. And so now when they ask me for any advice, like, I wait before saying anything. Like, I never come in saying like, oh, I know what to do or whatever, because obviously, like, I started valuing only the formal education I was getting and not even thinking of how many experiences that they've already had, that whatever they've learned, they might have sixth grade education, but they clearly know something, right? Because throughout all of these circumstances, like, they still have always had food and a roof over our heads for like a family of 6, even given their incomes and given everything that's happened. So you can't learn that in school. Like, they don't teach you that. And so I have so much to learn from them, but it took like late into my, not late, but like into my adult life for me to realize this.
So tell me a little bit more about like being the oldest of a family
Mm.
of 6 with you have, so it's 4 siblings. So you're a total of 4, but you have 3 that come after you, right?
Yes, yes.
So what did your parents, say, Alicia, you're the oldest, so you have to start working in high school to contribute, or no?
No, they actually, they always said you don't have to work. Like, don't worry about working. Like, you just focus on school. That's the most important thing. But I needed to work because like, by the time I was 16, I was understanding, like, we didn't have that much money. And I wanted to go out and I wanted to go to the movies. And I felt so terrible asking my parents for money every time. So I was like, if I need it, like, if I want to go out, like, I have to work. But my parents never told me, like, you have to work. It was more like, if I don't work, like, I don't get to do anything because the money's already tight. So I started working when I was 16. My siblings haven't really worked. Like, my sister, she only started working when she got to college, and that was still in the summers. And I really put it on myself to work. So 16, I started working. Probably by like 17 or 18, like, I was financially independent. By the time I went to college, like, I didn't ask for my parents for any money. I Since then I've been financially independent. Whereas like my sister, she didn't start working till the first summer after college, and throughout the academic year, my parents send her a monthly money, like a little bit. And so I always said, like, why isn't she working? And they'll be like, well, she needs to focus on school. Like, she's not like you. Like, she can't work. And I would always be like, but why? Like, I had like 3 jobs and I was going to school. I was like, I don't understand. But it's because maybe like she doesn't have like the need to be financially independent, and my parents are definitely not going to be the ones to push her to be financially independent, because as long as they can provide for her, they will. And similarly with my brothers, the brother who's younger than her, he was the one who was fighting cancer when we were growing up, and I think that really changed his experience in school, because he had to be out of school for so long. And then when he went back to school, like, it was really challenging for him. And eventually he ended up dropping out of high school. But even when he was in the process of dropping out, he was very much set on, I just want to work. Like, I don't want to go to school. I just want to work. And so he works, but also, like, recently, I think in the last year, signs of his cancer came back after years of, he had already been declared a survivor, but now the cancer came back. So his health is compromised, when he's going to work. So he doesn't go to work very much, maybe on the weekends only. So he's also in, some way dependent on my parents financially. And the youngest one, he's still in high school. So he's the youngest. And he's recently starting to, like, want to work. But besides that, also kind of financially dependent on my parents. So since I've been financially independent for a long time, for as long as I've had income, like, I always send money to my parents, which is, like, also why when we talk later about, why I was holding on to my job during the pandemic, it was because of this. Like, I have always been sending money back home, and if I stop doing that, like, I worry about what's going to happen. Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Okay, so the recording has resumed again.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely coming back to talking about sending money back home during the pandemic, I wanted to ask you what it was like growing up as a non-binary person, even if you didn't have that language yet.
Mm-hmm. I mean, okay, I definitely, see, I grew up very Catholic, and I had, I was going to school, and then on Saturdays I had church school, and then on Sundays I had church, and then, like, Thursday evenings we had, like, Bible study. Like, there was just a lot of church going on in my life. And I was so set that, like, the way to life was to marry a man and have kids and, fulfill all my sacraments and all that. And also, I hadn't been baptized. Oh, actually, this is interesting. I wasn't baptized as a baby. I don't know what happened, but I missed my baptism. And so when I was getting prepared for my first communion, they're like, well, how are you going to do your first communion if you haven't been baptized? But there is a process for people who have not been baptized to do their first communion, baptism, and confirmation all at once in one ceremony. So it happened to be on, I think it's March 9th. I forget, but it's like a sacred day. And so I basically got baptized, first communion and confirmation, like, all at once in one day. And I really thought I was, like, the holy everything, because because I was like, well, I was a grown person, and I was still making the choice, like, I want to continue in Catholicism at this time. And then later on, like, in middle school, I started questioning my religion and a lot of the things that I was learning in church. But I think at that point I wasn't necessarily questioning my gender yet. I was definitely questioning my attraction to boys and men. And I don't think that I would, like, realize that till, like, later in my life when I was, like, seriously questioning. But because of all this, like, I was dating in high school, dating boys. And then I had a really serious relationship in my last 2 years of high school that went into college in long distance. And then We're doing long distance for my first 2 years of college. And that time I got engaged. So yeah. So I was like 20 years old and engaged, to the love of my life, I thought. And like at this point we'd been together like 3 going on 4 years. I moved to France to study in France, and then he moved to France too. Not in the same city though, so we're still about 2 hours apart in long distance, but it was better than being like LA to New York long distance. And while we're there, it was his birthday, and I planned a trip for us to go to Rome, um, and to specifically the Vatican, because that was my grandmother's dream, to go to Rome and the Vatican. And she was not what is this word? When you can literate. She was not literate, but my dad tells me that she would look at pictures of Rome and the Vatican and say like, oh, I want to go. And they're very Catholic. And I was there with him, and I thought, this is it. Later, I was gonna find out he was cheating, and the engagement was off and everything, right? But when I was in that relationship, like even really early on in the relationship, I always assumed like that what they would categorize like the masculine gender roles in the relationship. So I already had a job, by 16. He didn't have a job. I drove a big truck, and he didn't know how to drive. And so everybody would always make fun of it, because they'd be like, haha, your girlfriend is has a job and has a car, drives you around in a truck, and like, what do? You don't know that thing. And I didn't realize that was something like, oh, like, it was a big deal. But I was like, I had a job because I need my own money, and I drove a truck because that's what the car my dad had, so I would use his car. So I guess that's maybe when I kind of questioned it. And like even the relationship, as I looked back on it, that relationship was very queer. Like as much as it was still like, this is gonna be my husband, we're gonna get married and have kids, blah blah blah. Like between us, like it was pretty queer, but I didn't have the language. And so when I went to college, actually right before I started college, I had this friend who, I was going to a private liberal arts, predominantly white, very elite college, and the incoming class had a Facebook page. So I had somebody message me on the Facebook page and was like, hey, I just found you in the incoming class Facebook. You're the only other brown person I see. Can we be friends? And I was like, okay, so we started chatting back and forth on Facebook before we would ever get on campus. And then throughout that summer, like I would we'd be Snapchatting and getting like photos, and he'd send me pictures of who was his partner, his boyfriend. And he'd be like, oh, my boy. And like, I was so much in like cis het world. Like, and so I was like, oh, is that your son? And later it'd be like, no, that's my boyfriend. And I was like, oh, and like awkwardly, because I had not had any queer friends, and this is the first time I was like, and mind you, I was very Catholic. Like I was very Catholic. And later he would tell me, he's like, when I first met you, like I thought you wouldn't even be my friend because I was gay, and you were so Catholic, and you were like, like this. And it's so wild to think that was me at some point. Like, I was like, I'm a straight woman, like I, God and church and everything. And then I started, obviously he became my friend, whether he was gay or not. And I started going with him to all these like LGBT events on campus. And I was in college, like, learning for the first time to question anything, because growing up in school, like public school, all I did was follow the rules. Like I always did everything as I was told, also because that's how my parents told me to grow up. And like later I would like think about how that really affected me, that I have parents who worked in a factory where you don't ever say anything to your higher ups, like you just do your work, and have parents who didn't complete their education, so they very much made it to, like, you must follow every rule, like don't mess up kind of thing, like, be good in school, like that's all you have to do. So that's what I've been doing my whole life. And here I was in college where they're like, question everything, like make sure, like, question authority, question this theory and that theory. And I was like, what, like this is so different. So now it's just being introduced to this idea of questioning any information. And so I started questioning my own sexuality, because I was going to all these LGBT events as, oh, hi, I'm Alicia, I'm an ally, I'm just here with my friend. And then I would hear all these queer people talk about their stories and their own like sexuality journeys, and I'd be so interested, like too interested to be straight. Like, and so I'd be like, oh, and then I started going from like, hi, I'm Alicia, I'm an ally, to like, hi, I'm Alicia, I'm questioning. And then eventually, like, as I was still in this relationship, I took a break from this relationship because it came to a point where I was questioning my sexuality so much. And I told, I told my boyfriend at the time, I was like, hey, like this is starting to happen. I'm going to question my sexuality. I think I need some break to figure this out. And then he kind of sent an ultimatum and was like, okay, well, either, go figure yourself out and like forget about this relationship, or, forget about that and just we continue our relationship. And I had to make that choice. I remember it being like a really difficult choice, but I knew like, okay, either I'm about to live the rest of my life like with this in the back of my head, like married to this man who I, as him basically to suppress all these questions, or whatever, like let me go figure out my sexuality, and then if this still works out, then then it works out. So it took me about 2 or 3 months. I kept going to all these LGBT events. Here I was like, hi Alicia, I'm Alicia, I'm questioning. I got my first like crush on a lesbian, and then I was like, okay, I'm definitely queer, like, and so I started being like, hi, I'm Alicia, I'm queer, and I'm still showing up to these events, and then after like 2 or 3 months, and I still went back with that boyfriend. So we went back together for another 6 months before then it was like over. But I did go figure out my sexuality, but that wasn't until college. But if I trace back, like, the thoughts of it, and like any kind of like thing that would have maybe like been like a tipping, like if I would have had the language, or if I would have had more exposure, or if I wouldn't have religion being shoved down my throat, like it probably would have started maybe like early middle school. Yeah.
Well, that's a very interesting story. Saw me smiling a lot. What school did you go to?
In where?
College, the white elite school you mentioned.
Yes, this is Claremont McKenna College.
Okay. Did you like excel, quote unquote, in high school? And then how was the applying to college's process? Did you have a mentor to help you through that? Because your parents, you said, didn't go to college or anything.
So, this is a good story too. So in high school, yeah, like I said, like, I was following all the rules, I was doing all the right things. I didn't necessarily have like perfect grades. I had B's and C's here and there. But I also spent a lot of time like volunteering, and I did it out of my own compassion. I didn't know that like people were racking up volunteer hours for their college applications. So that wasn't on my mind, but there's like one organization where we would go every Sunday to feed people experiencing homelessness at the park right next to our high school. And I did that every Sunday for like 4 years. And I would also go to like different events with my cousin, like, building houses with Habitat for Humanity or whatever, whatever was going. We found volunteering to be like the funnest thing you could do as a kid. So we'd go to all these things because you get free t-shirts, you get to meet a bunch of people, you're doing some awesome job. And I didn't know that like volunteering was something I would need for college. And so then when it came to applying to college, there was this program in Orange County, and it's still there. So I'm actually, now fast forward to the future, like I'm actually a mentor for these incoming cohorts. But at the time, like they were recruiting 3 people in the school district to apply for this program. Mind you, like from middle school, I was already like excelling. I had gotten opportunities to go to other schools in the district that were in like wealthier areas of Orange County. and I had to turn those down because of my own income. So like the first opportunity I had was to go to Oxford Academy, and the thing is that was in a different part of Orange County, and I would need to take a bus, and so my parents would have to pay, I think it was like $300 a semester for me to take this bus to go to this school, but they were willing to cover the cost of, or the school was public, but you still have to test in to get in, and I had tested in, but my parents were like, we can't afford the bus. So I couldn't go. So I had to turn down the opportunity. Then out of middle school into high school, there was another high school that had the IB program, and the International Baccalaureate program. And I had tested in for that. And I was like, okay, I'm for sure going to this high school. And then when it was literally 1 week before the start of high school, like my yearbook leaving middle school said like, goodbye, Alicia, unfortunately, because every middle school funnels you into a certain high school, right? And I wasn't going to go into that funnel. I was going to a different one. And literally 1 week before high school starts, they're like, oh, the city has experienced budget cuts. The school is no longer offering the IB, so you have to go to your designated high school. So I remember being so upset because I was like, I'm brilliant, and like this high school like barely had any AP classes. It was my designated high school. And so hardly had any IB classes or no IB classes, hardly any AP classes. And I also had friends who had more income, whose families were moving them to other parts of Orange County so they could go to better schools. And that was happening, or people were like using like other people's addresses to get into other schools. And I remember being like, well, I can't do that. I guess I'm gonna go here, And then I went to the high school, and I always thought like what all the opportunities I missed because we didn't have the income for it. And then so now here was, the last year of high school, and this program's coming around, funded by Tiger Woods, with the Tiger Woods. Now it's the TG Learning Lab. At the time, it was called the Tiger Woods Foundation, and they were recruiting for 3 people in the entire district to get this opportunity to be part of their college access program. And this program would encourage students to apply to 10 private schools, and they would cover the cost of the applications, and they would also help you apply to any of the state schools. So out of high school, I applied to 18 schools. So 8 covered by waivers for the state schools, and then 10 covered by this program. And out of the 18, I only got 1 rejection, and that was to USC. And I had 17 schools to choose from, which is like wild, like to even think about like how much choice. But then that's like choice in terms of admission. But when it came to cost, I didn't have much choice. Like I had 2 schools, which was Claremont McKenna and Kalamazoo College in Michigan, whose cost was going to be like $1,000 for like a $60,000 education. So those were my 2 options. It was basically a full ride. I just had to pay like whatever the 1,000 something was for the year. And I was literally between like going to Michigan or staying in Southern California. And there was a lot of pressure because the main donor who had established this scholarship at Claremont McKenna had the scholarship in place for years, and he kind of just been waiting for a scholar coming from either Tiger Woods Foundation or some other nonprofit in LA to basically claim the scholarship. But he had set up the scholarship so it would only go to somebody coming from those organizations who had been admitted to CMC. And so everybody was kind of like, this scholarship is there waiting for you if you go. My parents were obviously like, oh, that's only 30 minutes away from home, like amazing, you don't have to leave. And then it was also ranked like 9th best college in the country and all these resources and all these things. So I was like, okay, yeah, I guess I'll go there. So that's where I ended up going. And God, like those were like wild 4 years of my life. And at the time, I've studied education. I've been in education for all this time, and I study education. And the more I study education, the more it's like hard to tell, especially like first gen low income kids, all the narratives that I was told. Like, oh, these are the best 4 years of your life. Like, this is going to change your life, blah, blah, blah. It is so hard to look at someone who's, at that age and tell them that, because there was so much nobody told me. And my first semester in college was terrible. I literally was like, I'm gonna drop out. Like, I can't do this. My grades were like, I had like, B's and C's in high school, but I hadn't had like C, D, F. And I was like failing, and I was like, I'm not gonna make it. Like, I don't know how I'm gonna do 4 years of this. I was also, part of the 10% of Latinx folks in the class, in the whole college. So we were literally like 10% or less. And then on top of that, this school is so expensive. It literally cost between, like, when I started, I think it was maybe $62,000 a year. When I left, it was maybe $68,000 a year. And it just kept going. And that didn't even include that, like, so when a New York Times study came out that 1 in 5 students at CMC are in the top 1% of this country, not including international students, which are 14% of their population, and international students pay majority full tuition. And so the amount of wealth that I was surrounded with, after, I explained about my upbringing, and now here I was in this classroom where, like, Sam Nordstrom, like the heir to the Nordstrom, and like people who owned, like, what's it called, Bath and Body Works, and like all these like big things, and like I just did not know what to do. And I remember like being in you have to take, so CMC is very much like government, econ, like these are some of the top majors. So these are also part of your general ed requirements, and they have, top faculty in the country or whatever. And we had to take a class where we had to read the book Coming Apart, and it's about class in the US. And I feel like one day I might revisit this book, but I remember reading it, fresh into college. And in that book, there's a little quiz. It's like 10 questions or something. And supposedly, according to, what's his name? His name is like Charles something, the author of Coming Apart. According to him, like, depending on the score that you get in this little quiz, it's supposed to determine like what class bracket you kind of fall in. And I don't remember exactly what all the questions were. I remember one question was like, how many times have you stepped foot in a factory? And that question stuck with me because every time I visit my mom at work, I step foot in a factory, And so I had said score, and then someone else's was like 0, because some of the people I was in class with have never stepped foot in the factory. Maybe their parents own big companies that have factories, but they never been in one. Oh, there was other question like, how many times have you used this word? And it was like some kind of like advanced vocabulary word. And, my score was 0. And so like at the end of this, in the class, the professor asked everyone to share what their score was on this little quiz. I did not want to share because my score was the score that basically indicated I was poor. And everyone who was sharing their score showed that they were, upper class. And I remember being in this class like, oh my God, I'm not sharing anything. Like, and at this time, like in my first year, being very highly conscious and afraid of talking about money and class. By the time I was, in my 3rd and 4th year of college, like I would talk about it because we're economics classes and people were, trying to theorize about food stamps, for example, and having no idea how food stamps actually work. And they'd be like, well, if a person's like this, or it'd be in another conversation where I remember this experience happened. We're in an international politics class and we're talking about like developing countries and all this. And then this person across from me says, oh, well, it's because poor people are just lazy. And I'm just like shriveling up because like I wanted to say something. Right. And no one is saying anything. And I'm just sitting there like, okay, like I want to say something, but I'm also like emotionally like overwhelmed. Like it's too much. And so I don't say anything. I wait for the professor to say something. Nothing. Conversation goes on, whatever, I did not feel good after that at all. And so then I met with the professor. I was like, hey, I want to meet with you. I want to talk to you about something that happened in class today. I went to her and talked to her. Mind you, like, she was blonde, blue-eyed, like had gone to Harvard. So my assumption was that she came from a well-off background. And so I went to go talk to her and I was like, hey, like today in class, someone said that poor people are just lazy. And as a person who grew up in a low income household and, you know, I would be classified as poor. I was like, that didn't sit well with me. I was like, at the time, I didn't feel like I could say anything. Nobody said anything. You didn't address it. Like, you know, what's up? And she was like, Alicia, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't hear the comment be made. If I would have heard that, like, I would have said something. She was like, I am actually a first gen low income as well. Like, when I was homeless, I lived in a car. She's like, I know you wouldn't be able to tell because I have a Harvard degree now, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, I actually grew up like, you know, very poor. And I was like, what? Like, and it was like the first time, you know, I was having this genuine conversation with the professor about class. And she had also said, you know, when we left that conversation, she said, you know, just as much as that person had, you know, every right to say that, well, not every right, but like was able to say that in our classroom, she's like, just know that you have as much power on that in that classroom to say what you need to say, because you are just as deserving of being here as anyone else who's in the room, if not more. And I was like, okay, you know, that conversation came out good. But then there was also other conversations with professors where, like, I had a psychology class where we had to do a life project where I basically had to do like the psychology of my own life and understanding, you know, my life. And when I went to share my life story, a lot of what I'm sharing here with this professor, her response was, wow, you know, your life has been such a struggle. Like, how did you make it here? How did you slip through the cracks? And so, like, after that, I don't remember what I got on that psychology project, but I just remember being like, that's, you know, these microaggressions that have actually like a macro impact on you. Here I am years later still talking about it, because I literally put out my whole life on this psychology project. And like, you know, she's, rather than like critiquing, you know, maybe what's in the project or whatever, here she is like looking at me like in pity, and then also in shock that somehow I'm here at CMC. And so I was like, you know, it's hard to focus on your academia when you're dealing with shit like that. Yeah, but that was my story of how I went to college.
That's awful. And it's so paternalistic too, her being like, how did you slip through the cracks? Like, how did you make it? You know?
Right.
Like, yeah, I'm sorry about that. So, what did you end up studying in college? Your
So
major.
so when I went in, coming out of high school, I was like, you know, super capitalist. I was like, I'm gonna start my own business. Like, I'm gonna travel the world. Like, you know, be a representative for like one of these huge business corporations. Like, my best friend and I in high school, started the Future Business Leaders chapter of our school. I was so certain, like, I'm gonna do international business. And so when I got to CMC, they were like, well, we don't have business, but we have international relations and economics. So these are like our top majors. So I was like, great, that's in line with what I want to do. But then like that first semester and like that first year, I was like, I'm not studying this. And like my mind totally shifted. I always wanted to be a teacher. Like growing up, I would play teacher with my siblings. So I'd come home at the end of the year with those workbooks that we do in school, and any pages that we hadn't done throughout the school year, I'd tear them out and I'd give like homework to my siblings, and then I'd have like myself like correct them, and we'd play school. I always wanted to be a teacher. And it was like my second year of college, and I called my dad like crying, and I was like, Dad, like, you know, I'm sorry, like this is not what you wanted, but like I want to be a teacher, and like I don't actually want to be like a business person. Or he always wanted me to be a doctor, and I was like, I don't want to do that. I was like, I actually want to be a teacher. And I was like, I hope that's okay, you know, like crying to him. And he was like, Mia, like of course, like you can to be whatever you want. It's like, you know, it doesn't matter. And so I switched my major to, I still stayed with international relations. I still had this like urge to travel the world. I had never left Southern California like my entire life. And even for college, I was still in Southern California. So I stayed studying international relations, and then I started studying Spanish literature because I knew Spanish growing up. And, you know, I was still to this day, like I only speak to my parents in Spanish, but I didn't know like the formalities of Spanish. Like I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to, I mean, I could read, but like really writing and understanding and like developing the vocabulary, I didn't have that. And any reading or writing I had done was through church school, so it was all like, you know, religiously related language. And so I studied Spanish and international relations, and I got to travel a lot in college, and I got to study a lot of literature in Spanish that I didn't even know existed. So that was great.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, taking that opportunity to learn the formalities of Spanish, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
So then, how did you end up in Philly?
Okay. So I was in college for those 4 years, right? And then after college, I went and did a teaching fellowship in India. So I was in India for a year. While I was in India, I was actually applying to PhD programs. So I applied to, I think, 5. Mind you, at the time when I had those 18 applications for undergrad, at that time I had wanted to, like, my dream was always like, I want to go to an Ivy League school. And I remember Stanford specifically was like my dream. I was like, I'm going to go to Stanford. Like, I used to watch all the virtual tours of Stanford campus, and like, I was just so set. And growing up in California, like, that was like the Ivy League of California, right? So I was like, I'm just going to move up north and live and go to Stanford. And when it was time to apply to 18 colleges, I had 10 applications for private. So I wanted to apply to Stanford and Harvard and Georgetown. Like, I put all of these on my list, Yale. And then the mentors of the program were like, Alicia, like, your SAT scores are not that high. You have B's and C's. Like, these are too many reach schools for you. Like, this is too much of a reach. And honestly, that made me really upset because I really wanted it, and I couldn't even. And here I had an opportunity to, apply to 10 different privates, and yet I wasn't even getting to choose the ones I really wanted. And yeah, I kind of just like stayed with that little bit of like a little bit of resentment because I wanted it and I didn't get to do it. Um, and so when I was applying for PhDs in education, I was only looking at like the Ivies. I was like, here I go again. I was like, this time I don't need anyone else to pay for it. Like, I'm going to pay for it myself. And so I applied to Harvard, Stanford, Penn, and UCLA. So I don't know, it was 5. I think I might have missed one. But I applied to these 5, and then I got rejection for most of them except for Penn and Stanford. And they didn't offer me PhDs. Both of them, suggested that for PhDs in education, you should have a master's first. So they both gave me options for masters at Stanford and Penn. But even that was like, oh my God, especially because Stanford was my childhood dream. And then I wasn't even considering Penn, honestly. I only applied because their application fee was waived and they were still listed on like top education schools. And so I really wanted Stanford, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to go to Stanford. But then when I looked at their financial aid packages, like, masters are already expensive. There's like hardly any funding for master's degrees. And um, I was looking at Stanford and Penn, and Stanford's like one of the requirements was that you couldn't work. If you were a full-time student, like, you should be focused on your study, and like they were either like you couldn't be employed, or like there was like a cap at how many hours a week you could work. And the amount of money, I don't remember how much they were giving, but it was hardly anything. And then Penn was actually giving me like double the funding. Plus, they were offering an assistantship, which was basically a research position job that was paid. And I could also have a job if I wanted something else. And the cost of living in Philadelphia versus in the Bay Area was a significant thing. But obviously, I didn't even know where Philadelphia was up until this point. Like, I'd been to New York, I'd been to DC. I had no idea Philadelphia was like in between them. And then I wanted to stay in California. So it was so hard of a hard decision. But eventually I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go with Penn because of the cost and also the opportunities that were being presented here versus at Stanford. So I kind of went back and forth between the two, and I told Stanford, I was like, Penn is giving me this, like, what can you give me? But they didn't move from where their offer was. So I ended up choosing Penn, and that's how I ended up in Philadelphia.
So your master's program was 2 years in Philadelphia?
Yeah, it was set to like a traditional path was like a year and a half.
Mhm.
I was trying to finish it in 1 year, like between August 2018 through maybe July 2019. But then by like April of 2019, like I was burnt out. My mental health was suffering. Like I was not going to finish my thesis deadline by May. And so everything got pushed into another semester. Everything ended up working out. But I remember being really stressed. And then I ended up moving the remaining like summer coursework and my thesis into the fall. And I actually went and did an internship during that summer back in India. So everything worked out. I ended up finishing my degree in December of 2019. So it took me about 1.5 years, which was anyways the traditional amount that it takes. Yeah.
And then you stayed in Philadelphia after.
Yeah. So when I finished my degree in December, I told I was so burnt out. Oh my God. Like I was so exhausted. And I was like, I'm going to take, January and February as my like rest months before I even like jump into job applications. And then it was January, February, and I was working part-time as a guest educator, so like a substitute teacher, and then part-time as at the grocery store in November. So when I was finishing my degree, I was working these 2 part-times. And then when my degree ended, I was like, okay, now I can just like cut back on working. And I obviously don't have to go to school anymore. So I thought I'll just work a few hours at the grocery store and then just guest educate maybe a few days a week at most. And then a coworker got injured in the kitchen team at the grocery store. So I ended up picking up her shifts. So I was basically on a full-time schedule again at the grocery store. And then I stopped sub teaching. I would do it like maybe once a week at most. And that was January, February. Then March came and I was like, all right, it's March. I was getting fed up with my job at the grocery store. It was like very physically exhausting. I obviously didn't get the rest I intended for those 2 months because I went from working, up to 20 hours to now working like almost 40 in those 2 months. And my days were basically like working 8 to 10 hours, 5 days a week through those months. And then using the weekends, or not the weekends, but my 2 days off to just catch up and then do it again. And March came and I was like, you know what? I'm tired of this. Like I have my degree now. I need to go find a job with this degree. And 1 week into job applications in March, I sent out like 3 to 6 applications. I got 3 to 6 rejections like within the first week right away. And I was like, oh, this is going to be terrible. And I talked to people who had finished the program in May who hadn't found jobs till like October. And so I was like, this is going to take a while. So I might as well continue working at the grocery store while I find a job. But then it was the second week of March and then it was pandemic. And I was working and I couldn't do job applications too, because that itself takes so much time. And I was so exhausted. There was so much like emotional energy with going to the grocery store during the pandemic, and my anxiety was through the roof. And then I think it was like, I was like March 13th, because the day after my birthday, and I had asked for that weekend off. So I didn't work on the 12th, which I would have originally, but it was my birthday. And then it was the 13th, and then I had the weekend off. But March 13th, I went in for work. And I remember this day like clear as day because I clocked in maybe like 11:50 for a noon shift, and I would work noon to closing, which could be anywhere between 9 to 10 p.m. And between noon and 10:30 p.m. that night, there was a line of customers the whole day, non-stop. Not even on like necessarily the kitchen end only, but like the front of the grocery store. Like from the registers at the front of the store all the way to the back, there was a line for the whole shift that I was there. And people were still shopping past closing, because Mom's has this thing where it's like, we'll stay open as long as the customer is there. So people were still shopping past 9 o'clock. Yeah. And so we didn't actually get to close the store down till like 10, and I was still there till like 10:30. And that day, like later when the sales, because they'd send you out the whole sales, that day itself, the store had made 3 times, maybe 4, 3 going on 4 times as much revenue as they usually did any other day. And this was at the peak of that, like, everyone's like panic, like when everybody was like taking old, like this is a time where there was no toilet paper, and people were hoarding everything. So all this is happening here in Philadelphia, right? I had that my weekend brunch, and then literally, I had invited like 50 people, and then like 2 people showed up, and majority of other people were like, hey, like it's not safe for me to travel. And then that's not the time when I was like, oh wait, like this is serious, like all I had seen was like the day of the 13th, and then on the 14th, like these are people's responses, and I was like, oh my God, this is serious. So by the 15th, it clicked in for me, like, oh, this is serious, like it took me that day itself to realize it. And then when that happened, at that time, so now 15th going through 17th, at the time, because there was so much hoarding of different resources. So my parents, the house hasn't had good plumbing for so many years. And for the longest time, they've been depending on bottled water because the cost of repairing the plumbing is like thousands and thousands of dollars. And if it's not the bottled water, then there's like a water dispensary place nearby. So at this time, all the water bottles in all the nearest grocery stores were sold out. And the water dispensary had a line like through the end of the block. And, all the people in my family are immunocompromised. Like my dad is age and his own health things. My brother obviously fought cancer. Like he has his own things. And then my mom has been working at the factory, although she also has like high blood pressure and like other illnesses. And so it wasn't good for any of them to be in this long ass line at the water dispensary. Plus they anyways ran out of water. Like the line was so long, the place ran out of water, and there was no bottled waters. So mind you, like I'm over here at this grocery store working with no PPE. Like we literally had nothing. And like I always tell the story about me running the black market of masks, because I worked in the kitchen. And so in the kitchen, as part of like regular supplies, you can have masks. So we had masks, and I started asking my manager, bring up the masks. I want to have a mask on. And maybe there was 1 or 2 employees in the store who were wearing their mask from home. Besides that, nobody was wearing masks. And it's already mid-March. And I asked him, can you bring another box of masks because I'm running out? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to bring it, but don't be giving them out. And people would come from the other departments and be like, hey, Alicia, like I heard you have the masks. And I'd be like, yeah. And I'd like give out the masks. And then I get in trouble from my manager being like, you can't be giving out the masks. These are for kitchen only. Like I'm hiding them over here. And so that's where we were at with masks. At the same time, my family didn't have water. So I was on social media, like fundraising money, because my dad said that they could get water if they could get a filter installed into the kitchen sink, and that filter was going to cost $200. So I put out a social media fundraiser and I got $200. I sent it over. They got the filter. In the meantime, I had, friends in Anaheim basically driving around to like different water dispensaries that were either still open or had any water, and then filled up some gallons for my family. So literally there was no water. And then with food, like they didn't have money for food. The lines at the grocery stores were so long. All of this was happening. And I was in Philadelphia, like panicking over my own situation over here and feeling like I couldn't leave my job, because if I left my job, how was I going to send money home? And if I just felt like I had to stay. Like I felt like I couldn't go anywhere. It was like, I have to stay at this job and I have to stay in Philadelphia because I'm more of a help here where I can send money than I am if I go home right now. And I can't even be in contact with my family because I would have to obviously quarantine and then also not have a job.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
So and when the pandemic started, you were working part-time at Mom's, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then your hours actually increased.
So kind of. They increased, but then I didn't want to continue accepting more hours. And at the same time, I almost felt like I needed to, because a lot of people, so Mom's offered the option to take an unpaid leave of absence. So a lot of folks, not a lot, but like a handful of people had started taking this option of unpaid leave. So now we were short staffed. So because I had been relatively new in the kitchen and mostly been trained only in the kitchen, I stayed in the kitchen, and like managers and like other staff who had been there longer, who were also trained in other departments of the store, got sent out to the main floor. And so now there was less people in the kitchen, but I was still there. So they were asking me to pick up more hours because now half of our team was now out on the main floor. But at the same time, one, I didn't want to pick up more hours. And then two, now we were in the process of restaurants closing. So restaurants were going to close. And with that, the kitchen should have closed. Like the moment that restaurants closed in Philadelphia, that kitchen should have been closed. But because it was still in the grocery store, um, and because then they switched over to like you can be open if it's only for pickup, and since that place is a place where like basically all they did was close the seating area and then it was still open, which was also like terrible because our dishwasher had been broken for a while. And yeah, you can still wash the dishes and sanitize without a dishwasher, but it was disgusting. Like it was so disgusting. And so I switched from we're going to stay open, and people were still coming in for, you know, their one celery juice that they just had to get. And I was here like freaking out because people were coming in one Cliff Bar, one bunch of celery. You know, it's just things that's just like, if you're going to come in the store, get your full groceries and don't come back. But no, I was seeing the same customers every day as if nothing had happened. And they would always come in with their comments, which, you know, I know the intention might be like to make me feel better or appreciated, but it would always be like, I'm so glad you're here. Like, I know you probably don't want to hear this, but, you know, I'm so bored at home and I just need a reason to get out. Like, yeah, so can I get, you know, my ginger lemonade? And it was just like, I literally like not wanting to be here. I'm risking my life to be here. And, you know, people just coming in for one or two things. And that was super frustrating. And then it changed from we're still open to customers to now we're closed to customers, but we're still open because we need to feed the staff. Because as part of working there, you get a complimentary meal as part of your shift. And even that part, I was still like pushing against because that dishwasher was broken. And I was like, this is so dangerous because, okay, yeah, we're not feeding the public anymore, but we're still feeding our employees. And I don't even think that we have a proper sanitation process for any of these dishes or anything that we're cooking on or any of the food we're prepping. But yeah, nobody wanted to listen to that. And then on top of that, you know, in the back of the store was the alcohol. So what also happened is at the time, you know, alcohol places were getting super crowded because there was rumor that they were going to close all the liquor stores. And so there's a few liquor places in Center City, but the lines were so long. And some customers who had been going to the store were like, oh, well, you know, the grocery store has beer and wine. It doesn't have like hard liquor, but they have beer and wine. So now I had people coming in, like so many people coming in with just like trying to buy like cases and cases of beers or like all the bottles of wine. And that was happening. And because if you're on the kitchen team, you're trained with the certification to sell alcohol, but a lot of the employees in the store are not. And so there's only a handful of people who can sell alcohol. And my shifts were already regularly like Thursday through Sunday or Monday nights. So I was getting the peak of alcohol sales because I was there every single night through a weekend. And even in the pandemic, like people still treat the weekends the same. So I was getting all these alcohol sales, and the little alcohol section was, if you're really social distancing, maybe safe for at most 2 people. And there was crowds of like 8 people in this section. And then they would come and check out with me. And I would literally, I mean, my last day that I worked there, I literally had a panic attack after an incident like this because I saw a crowd of like 8 people all in this little alcohol section and then come to me to check out. And I literally wanted to pass out because it freaked me out. Like, you have all been in such close contact. And it would be groups of like 6 people coming in for like their night out to buy 1 bottle of wine, but parading throughout the whole store in a group. And so that was terrifying. And on top of that, like, it was Center City. The alcohol places are now closed. Whole Foods at some point ran out of alcohol. So then Sage.
When did people start wearing masks in the grocery store?
Like the customers or the employees?
The customers.
I would say maybe that third week of March. I think after we had hit lockdown, but even then it wasn't even all the customers, and the store never, like at that time, didn't make it something that was required to come in. Like they weren't requiring people to wear it when they would come in, so people would still come in without a mask. It was very much like up to you, like personal choice. And at this point, like I think most employees were wearing masks. um I don't know if properly or like, throughout the whole shift, but like I think at this point most employees were wearing masks, but they were bringing their own. They weren't provided by the store until I think honestly like the third week of April, and that was also only after post organizing and an action. And the whole time it was just like the store saying, yeah, we're ordering them, like they're coming, like yeah, we're getting new masks, but it literally took until April.
What organizing and action? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it started before I was even involved. Like this was already like kind of like one of the people who had gone around and kind of collected everyone came up to me when I was in my shift and kind of started with like, hey, how's it going? And it was one of those days where I had just dealt with like all these customers and all these alcohol sales, and I was like, yeah, I'm just kind of like, over this. Like I'm tired, I'm anxious, I don't feel safe here, all these things. And then they're like, oh, well, we're having a Zoom call together. So why don't you just join us? And we're just all going to talk about, how it's going. And that is how the call started. Like, it was a group of some other workers, and it was like, everyone sharing how they've been feeling really anxious, or they've been feeling like the company isn't really doing anything. And so initially it felt like really good because it was very validating, and like, you kind of just like hear other people's stories and you're like, okay, I'm not going crazy, because otherwise I felt like I was losing my mind because no one was really talking about it. And we were all kind of being forced to pretend like everything was okay for the sake of preserving this customer experience where they don't panic. But even though there is a pandemic happening, so that's how it started. And then as like, everyone kind of gauged like where everyone was feeling very similarly, like frustrated, then it started being conversations about, okay, this is what we're going to do. And like, let's start gathering a list of demands. Let's start gathering like who are some trusted folks who might want to be part of this. And then that's how I picked up.
So how did you feel during this time? Like, I don't know, I remember you posting a lot on Instagram of just like being really like frustrated with the company and like scared. Like, I don't know, this time was just so like, it's always going to stay with us, right? The pandemic,
Yeah.
especially like March. And yeah, I remember your birthday party that I couldn't go because it was like the apocalypse was happening.
Right. That's how it felt. I mean, I was certain that was it.
Yeah. So yeah, just maybe a little like, what was it like to be organizing under these conditions?
Well, it looked really different. Not only was there like the general panic that's happening, but also like there's like this additional fear of like you're now putting into question and you're organizing in something that questions your job security, puts into question your job security and could be jeopardizing your job at a time where so many people are losing their jobs. So there's like that additional fear, or like, you're jeopardizing your job when there's already so much uncertainty on like any other forms of income. And so I think there was just so much like going on there. And then on top of that, it's like you're organizing with a disease, is that the right word, where you have to literally social distance, and people have to be in their homes removed, so you can't, like, every other organizing experience I had was like, you gather in groups, like you sit together and like discuss things. And so this isn't what's happening now, because you were doing it over Zoom, over phone calls. If there was going to be something done in person, we had to be super mindful of people being socially distant. But also having, support from people who works more experienced labor organizers, and then just like the creativity within the community, and coming up with like the idea of the car drives. Like now those are being used for so many other things. Like now people are using those for celebrate graduations and like birthdays and all these things. But at the time I was like, that's brilliant. Like a car drive, so much attention. Everyone still gets to be socially distanced in their cars. And also like gathering like the media, making sure that they were present, but like not all up in your face either. That was a lot to consider.
Were you interviewed a lot by the media?
I did a few. Yeah, I did at least, I'd say maybe like two or three.
So the local media was covering it.
Mm-hmm.
That's good.
Yeah.
And when did moms like respond to you all?
I mean, respond is like, I don't know if that was like the best word, because honestly, a lot of the times they weren't. For a long time, they weren't. So the company head was kind of just like sending out these like passive aggressive emails that weren't really addressing what our demands were. And at the same time, we had part of the mobilizing was to get people who were like customers or community members to send in emails, because he has his public, or they have like the company email public for feedback. And so we were using that as a way, like, get people to send in feedback and demand more PPE for workers. And he was actually responding to those things first in a very formulaic way. So like the first time I heard of a response was from like a friend from years ago. We had studied abroad together, and she sent me a screenshot. She had sent in a concerned customer feedback, email, and he had responded to her saying like, oh, like you look like a decent person, blah blah blah. And then this like formulated message that we later found out he was basically sending out to anyone, not anyone, but like anyone who he seemed as like a decent person. And like that was just very telling of his own biases in politics, because this person was sending to me was a cis straight white woman. And the customer base of moms is, I don't want to say all, but very cis straight white, and usually of higher income. And so I was like, oh, of course he deems her a decent person or whatever. And then his emails and the social media all kept being like, don't believe the workers, like they're exaggerating, they're just like a handful of people, and like all of our employees, like it's a great place to work, and just really discrediting anything we're saying, or at least trying to, and like definitely invalidating what we're saying. I got blocked on social media when we were sharing all of these things. The company was blocking anybody who would basically post anything that was at all like in opposition to what they were saying. So that was their response. I mean, this is a huge company that has a full media team, and you're acting like a teenager, or not even, like that's so terrible, but like you're just acting so irresponsibly and taking no accountability whatsoever.
Yeah, no, it's been terrible. It's been terrible seeing corporations' response. Mm-hmm. So did this affect your ability to send money home to your parents?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I worked, whatever part-time schedule through March. I didn't want to take any more hours because I was already highly anxious and I didn't even want to be at work. Like I think it would have been so different if from the get this store had said, we're closing the store temporarily. We're going to see what we need to do. We're going to make sure all our employees have, what they need. We're going to make sure there's plexiglass. We're going to limit the number of people. We're going to take, all the necessary safety measures. If that would have been the case, I would have not felt everything I was feeling at the time of like, I feel like I'm going to die, because I literally felt like I was going to die because I have asthma and we're working across the street from a hospital with, nurses and doctors coming into the store all the time, even after lockdown. Like they need somewhere to get their lunch and a majority of restaurants were closed. So they're coming into the grocery store to get food in their full like gear, like without changing into anything. Like they're coming straight from the hospital into the store, and we don't even have plexiglass. We're over here like running on this scarcity of masks, and my asthma specifically triggered by exercise. And I was riding my bike to and from work because I couldn't take public transportation anymore. And so all of this was happening, and so that was March, right? So I barely made enough money. Then April rent came on the 1st, and also schools closed. So see, my other part-time teaching gone. So now I had $640 on that paycheck in March, and I put $600 towards rent in April. So I had $40 for the month of April, and that was going to be, if that wasn't the case, and it was going to be even worse in May, because by April 4th or 5th, I said, I'm not coming anymore. I'm taking the unpaid leave. So I wasn't going to make May rent. Of course, I wasn't going to be able to send money home. But during the time in March when I was still working, that's what I was working for, because I was like, I need to send money home, and they don't have water and they're not having food. So I guess I'll just continue, to work, because not only did I have to pay my own bills, but, I had a family depending on me. And then eventually, like, that wasn't worth it anymore, because like there's no point of continuing to do that when like I literally like I was so certain I'm gonna get sick and die. And so I was like, if that happens, then no one's gonna be helped.
So how did you, at what point did you decide to move back home? Or was it,
Mm,
yeah, just completely out of, you had no other options?
yeah, kind of. At the time, it was the I think it was the 4th of April. No, I don't remember. It was like we had we were planning for an action. Oh, that's it. We were planning for the action, and I was on the phone calling different people to see if they could send in emails to the company in preparation for this action. And as I'm calling different people, I called my friend who he had been living in Philadelphia. He had a friend in New York who had just moved down to Philadelphia to stay with him, but they're both from California. They're both from the Bay Area. And when I was talking to him, I was like, hey, can you please send an email to the company, just advocating for the workers? And he's like, yeah. He's like, what are you doing? And oh, I'm still here. I'm probably going to be here like through May, because I did have a flight to California in mid-May, previous to the pandemic. So I had planned to go to California anyways. I was like, oh, I'm probably going to California in May. Like, I'll just hang in until then. And then he's like, what do you mean hang in? Like, things are already like so terrible in April. And they're like, what about your family? I was like, well, yeah, I'm so worried about my family, but I can't get on a plane, and I have Sage. So I was like, I'm definitely not taking, Sage on a plane. And I just don't see how I would get across the country right now in April. And they literally were like, okay, like, mind you, I had like a dream days before where this scenario would kind of play out. But I paid some attention to it, but then when this was happening, I was like, oh, this is what that dream was like trying to tell me. But basically, they're like, okay, well, we're leaving in like, this was on a Sunday call, and they're like, we're leaving by like Thursday. Um, do you want to come? Because they were in the process of renting the car that they were going to drive across, and they're like, we're anyways going to get a big truck. You can go in the back. How much stuff do you have? And it really felt like one of those moments where all this like ancestral knowledge of movement and migration kind of hit, because it happened so quickly. Like the action was like on a Tuesday, and by Thursday morning I was on the road to California. I packed up like the whole apartment in like a day, like prioritizing like these are things I absolutely need and these are things that can get left behind and I can figure out later. And it literally felt like the world was ending. I was like, it feels like the world is ending and I have to be in California with my family, whatever, to my things. Like, let me pack, the most important things. And I left behind so much stuff. But I didn't even care because I was like, I don't have time. I don't have time for this. And we packed up the truck and then we drove across the country in 4 days and hardly like slept. It was 3 of us. I thought we would have like turns driving, but I was in the back taking care of Sage, puppy and a cat. And we couldn't stop in hotels, obviously, because that wasn't safe. And we were super cautious in gas stations. Sometimes we wouldn't even go into the gas stations if the lines for the bathrooms were too long. The majority of places were closed along the route, so we had to stop only in like trucker stops. And that wasn't very safe, but like there we were. And so sometimes we were just like, go pee in the grass because that's what we had to do. And we definitely slept in gas stations. Like we parked the truck and slept for a couple hours in the gas stations. And I don't know, it just happened really quickly. And then within like 4 days, we were already in California. Like we left Thursday morning Eastern time, and I got to California by Sunday evening, which is really fast. Like it was hardly any stops.
Are the 3 of you queer or trans or gender nonconforming?
Yeah, two of the 3 are queer. And yeah.
Because you said it wasn't safe, and I obviously think it was a pandemic, but I'm wondering if you meant more.
Yeah, I mean that part definitely, but also like all of us are brown, and 2 of us are like queer femmes, and we had to be getting off in like the middle of the US, like in the Midwest, in places where it was predominantly white communities. You see all the Trump 2020, you see all the Confederate flags waving, and you're just in a parking lot with a bunch of trucks, Okay.
So what was it like moving back home?
Yeah, so when we first got there, it was actually an Easter Sunday. And like I said, like my parents are very Catholic. So it literally felt like Easter miracle that we had made it. Also, this is still the time when, everything is so frightening. Like it literally felt like apocalypse. We didn't know what was going on. And I literally could not have believed that we had just traveled across the country in such a short amount of time, or that I had left everything. Like I didn't get time to say bye to anybody or like anything. It just happened so quickly. And then I get there and then I can't even like hug my parents, and they've set up like the garage for me to stay in the garage because I was going to quarantine. So there's like a bed in the garage, and it was heartbreaking because I was like, I literally, have experienced all of this, like leading up to that moment. And I'm like, okay, like I'm in the presence of my family. Like I know they're alive. I know they're safe. I can't hug you. Like you need to stay like over there, especially my dad because he's so old. So that was, the beginning of it. And then I couldn't actually stay in the garage because there's like a lot of rodents in the garage. So I had to eventually. Give me 1 second. Sage? I think we're good. Oh yeah, so I can actually stay in the garage because like that is not actually good living conditions. And so we slowly started moving my things inside. And then for the next, first 2 weeks, I'd mostly be in my room, if not outside in the backyard by myself. So I had to be quarantined in that way. But also at this time, like this is the first time I'm like moving back home without a plan of leaving again. And the last time I had been home, for like the longest I had been home, and the most recent time I'd been home before that was the summer of 2018. And at that time I was home between like maybe 3 months, and I knew I was leaving by the mid-August or end of August. Like I knew there was a plan to get out. And this was the first time where I was home and I didn't know. like when I'm leaving. I didn't know what was going to happen. Okay. And so that uncertainty was terrifying because, now at this point I've spent, majority of my adult life away from home. Like when I moved out at 18, I hardly came back, if anything, at most for that summer. And most recent to that, I just spent, the last 2 years in Philadelphia, where I really grew into myself and like, began questioning my gender, came out as gender non-conforming and non-binary, and was very connected and into my queerness in a way that I had not before. Like I really got to know myself, and I was studying sexuality education, and like who I am in Philadelphia is not at all at all who I was in California or growing up in California. So now I'm coming home, and even while I've been away, my mom has a problem with like my head shaved or my armpit hair growing or the number of nose rings I have or my tattoos. Like all of this is a problem. Even my belly out, like that's a problem. And I knew going home that this would cause some things, but that wasn't the priority, right? The priority was I need to be home, I need to be with my family, I need to, I obviously am losing my partner here. I left my job, like I have to get somewhere. So because those were the priorities, like I wasn't even thinking like, oh, what about my gender? And what about, my sexuality? Or what about just any aspect of my liberation? Like was not crossing my mind at all. And also like my veganism, like nobody is vegan in my household and nobody in my immediate like close friends group back home is vegan. And I literally felt like I was like in a way traveling back in time, but like in a different version of myself, because here the majority of my friends had been vegan, everybody was like queer, trans, and now I was going home where like I'm back to being like the only queer person or the only trans person or the only fucking vegan. Like it was just like everything that isolated me, just but all the everything that isolated me there but like freed me here was like happening. And I remember when I had been in a situation before, how being on social media was like the thing where I like would look on social media and be like, oh my God, there's like, other like QT vegans of color. And like, there's other people who like share all these other different identities. And then back at home, like, not only was that not around me, but also I had to like suppress my own sexuality, because when I came out to my mom in 2018, it was like January 1st, 2018, I had my first girlfriend. After a few months, I was like, you know what, I want to tell my parents about my sexuality. And I had waited, like I knew I was queer by like 2015, but I always had thought like, if I come out to my parents about my queerness and I don't have like a partner or like someone to like make it tangible for them, then, which is also like really messed up, but it's like I felt like if I didn't have that, then they're not going to believe me and they're going to say it's in my head or whatever. So when I had a girlfriend after a few months, I was like, I wanted to introduce you to my parents, which also I had already introduced her, but as my friend. So here I was like, where I was in India still. So I was like, this is, actually not my friend, the person that was taking care of me when I was really sick last week, like actually that's my girlfriend. And the response was from my dad, oh, I seen a lot about that on TV, mija. Like, I seen it, like, it's okay. Like, you love whoever you want to love. Like, we accept you. We love you. My mom, on the other hand, was like, who is that bitch? Like, what did they do to you? Like, why are you saying these things? Like, this is gross, blah, 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 all these things. And I mean, my whole life, like, any scene of like, like girls kissing or like boys holding hand, whatever, anything like that on TV, change the channel. That's disgusting. Like, change the channel. And so I came out as queer, and then my mom didn't talk to me for 4 months. And I was in India and I was still Skyping home or like, calling home. But my dad would answer and my mom would be like in the back, like peeking in, but like not actually coming to say hello. And when I came back from India, I said like, you have, because she's like, oh my God, mija, like welcome home, like this and that. And I was like, you literally have not talked to me for the last 4 months. since New Year's, because that's when I came out. It was in New Year's. And she's like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, completely denying it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. So like, that's how I knew, like, okay, mom is not accepting. And on top of that, she kept like, that summer was also terrible because she kept taking me to church, or trying to take me to church, and like insisting, if you go to church, everything will be right, and you need to go to church. Like, you're not going to church. That's why these things are happening. Like, you're not right. Like, when I shaved my head, like, whole ass thing. My dad, on the other hand, like, we went to Mexico together, and I was dressed very masculine throughout that trip. And people would ask, "Oh, es tu hijo?" Or my dad would be like, "Oh yeah, hija, hijo." Like, he alternates, calling me a little bit of both, just depending, whatever. My mom, on the other hand, is not. So when I was home now, this time, and like uncertain of when I would ever be able to leave, I completely suppressed my sexuality. On top of the fact that there is no privacy in that house. Like, every door is open. It's, 6 of us living in this house, and everything is like a shared room. I didn't masturbate for 4 months. Like, I could not speak a word about sex. Every time my shoulders was out, oh, ¿por qué andas encuerada? Like, why are you naked? Armpit hair out. Oh, that's gross. You need to shave that. Your head is shaved. Why do you want to look like that? Your belly is out. Oh, panzona, this and that. Like, fuck. I can't exist without a critique for every single thing. And that's what I mean when I say, like, that was an abusive household. Like, on top of, like, the other verbal abuse that's just, like, happening. Like, those are the ways that I was specifically being, like, abused, and like not being able to live. This was me already, like, suppressed, with my suppressed sexuality. I can't even imagine if I would have just, like, really embodied myself at that time. I literally would not be safe. Like, I would not probably be alive, like, and safe in the sense that, like, I don't feel like anyone's gonna physically attack me, but my own mental health, like my own safety, like, it was not happening. I was so depressed during that time. And I was on social media a lot more because I felt like I needed to look somewhere to remind myself that I was still queer, and I was still trans, and like that I was even still alive, because such a big part of me was completely just, like, suppressed. And then thinking about literally every other person whose life has been shifted in this pandemic, or who already lived, like, in closeted in their homes, or like in their family abusive households, who are now, like, confined to staying in the house. Like, so many people who live like that, you spend your time outside, including myself. Like, I didn't realize till later on that why I like spending time out so much from the house. It was because of this. I couldn't be myself, so I spent time outside. But now you're in a pandemic where you need to be inside with your abusers, and it's like you have nowhere to go. So I started thinking about every other person whose, like, life got shifted with the pandemic, especially like queer and trans people who now have to live in situations that are probably not safe. And it's so wild because, Trans Visibility Day had just passed, maybe like I think February or March, and I had made a post about that, and it was like, my prayer to all my trans siblings who are in homes that are unsafe for them. And then here I was now, like, in a home that was unsafe for me. So I would spend so many days just, like, praying, like, how do I get out of here? Like, I need to get out of here. But also, like, how do I get out of here when I already left I left my job, I lost my apartment, I don't have money, I don't have an income, and I have to prove to any housing situation that you have income. Like, I kept hitting a wall because it was like, you need 3 times income. And then I had some money left over from a fellowship that I got during graduate school. And that came through at the end or the middle of May because of the end of the academic year. And so now I had this, some savings money, but I couldn't prove that I had a job because I didn't have a job. So I still had to be waiting to, like, get a job, to get a lease. So I just kept praying and praying, and it took 4 months. Like, after 1 week, I was already like, I need to get out of here. And I did not know, I had no idea it would be 4 months before I would actually be able to get out of there. And so throughout the 4 months, like, I went through waves of, like, I hate it here, I need to get out, to, like, I guess I'm here, let me see what I can do while I'm here, why am I here? And then yeah, and then I just kind of went through waves back to like, I need to get out. And it would always just be flip flopping. At some point, I was like, I just need to accept that this is where I'm meant to be. Like, who knows how long? I guess I'm moving in back with my parents permanently. But I didn't want to accept it because I was like, this can't be it. And, I literally lost sight of my liberation. I was in so much survival mode and so exhausted and after so much trauma that I was like, I can't even think about my liberation anymore. And that's terrifying. That's honestly terrifying. But eventually, after all these months, like, things kind of literally just fell into place quite miraculously. And it turned out that one of the people that I had actually worked with at Moms and organized with was looking for a roommate for August 1st, and the price was something I could afford, and I didn't have to prove income or anything. I just had to, say I had a job or was looking for a job. I had, X amount of money saved up. Um, and then coincidentally, there's a bunch of schools in the area. And so I was like, let me just see if one of the schools are hiring. Turns out they're hiring down the street. So I got this job down the street and I found a home and, drove a week across the country to get back to Philadelphia. But I also knew I didn't want to live anywhere else. Like I did look into like LA or like, I don't know, I was like, maybe I need to move somewhere else. But I was like, I don't even have the capacity or the energy to build community again. And that's so important that I was like, I'm not moving anywhere else in a pandemic to live by myself where I don't even have a single person around me that I know or can depend on. And it's like, I already spent these years building this here in Philadelphia, or at least in the East Coast. And whereas in California, yeah, I have friends, but like nobody really like shares these identities. Like there's different things that, different friends fulfill. And those friends obviously, reflect a lot of what my upbringing is and my life, growing up, but like they don't necessarily reflect where I am in the present. So it still feels alienating and isolating. So I was like, I need to go back to a familiar place, some place I have community. And so if that means I have to go across the country, well then, here I go. And then here I am.
Wow. That's intense. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple questions.
Mm-hmm.
I know we want to finish, so I'll just ask two.
Sure.
Do your parents know you're non-binary, or do they? Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like I haven't had no explicit conversation with them where I'm like, yes, I'm non-binary. I literally don't think that they would understand. And also, like, I don't even want to group my parents together because my dad, he clearly understands something. Like, he understands something if he constantly alternates between calling me hijo and hija. Like, within the same sentence, he'll be like, hijo, hija. Like, he'll kind of do that fluidity. Mom, no, like she couldn't accept that I was in a relationship with a woman when I was identifying as a woman. So like I really don't see her being able to understand non-binary, and I already foresee the response being like, that's in your head, let's go to church. So no, I don't know.
Okay. And the last question I had was, I'm curious about your work at Moms in the Kitchen as a vegan
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
how that was like, and also going back home.
Yeah. So at Mom's, the kitchen and the grocery store is vegetarian, mostly vegan. Um, like all of their dressings and all the stuff that's on the salad table, minus they have eggs and feta and Parmesan cheese. Those are like the three things in the whole kitchen that are not vegan. And those are things you can add to your salads. And so when I started working, my whole hope was like, I'm going to make this, whole vegan kitchen. But people still with their feta and Parmesan and eggs. And even with the eggs, like hardly ever did anyone ask for an egg in their salad. Literally, we would have to make like 5 eggs every morning because they wanted the fresh eggs. At most, one would get sold, and then we have to throw them away. Which, like, when where the eggs come from, it's like all that to just throw them away. And every morning we had to do that. At some point, like they were reusing the eggs for like maybe 2 or 3 days and then throw them out if they wouldn't sell. But then everyone's like, oh, we need them to be fresh every day. And I hated that. That was like one of the worst parts of my job, because I was like, you're literally making me cook up these eggs that no one even cares. Like, if you took these off the menu, no one's even gonna know. But there we were. And then with the cheese, like, they could easily have switched over to doing like vegan Parmesan and vegan feta. Especially, it's not like these people aren't already paying $12 for a bowl of lettuce, like, whatever. But no, that didn't change. Yeah, it was challenging, but those are like the minor things I had to kind of ignore. But then going home, nobody in the house is vegan, and no one really understands boundaries. So when I was home, everybody was cooking meat, dead bodies. And I literally, I remember this was like one of the worst parts of like the first week, was that I literally ate peanut butter jelly sandwich and cereal for a whole week, because opening the fridge was traumatizing. And on top of that, I like didn't even know, like, I just had to, it was like, so terrible. It was like everything I saw in the fridge was like meat or cheese or milk. And I just couldn't believe that there was no vegetables. Like, there was hardly any vegetables. And that was just like so frustrating. So I just closed the fridge and I didn't want to eat. And one thing is that my parents do have like almond milk in the house, because as they've gotten older, they like lactose intolerant. So I would basically drink up all the almond milk with my cereal, or make a peanut butter jelly sandwich and then just eat that with almond milk. But I didn't really eat for like a week. And then eventually, and I was so depressed and tired. Um, so then eventually we had an old fridge in the backyard. So my dad plugged it in and he was like, that can be your fridge. So you can go, use that fridge. So I had my own little vegan fridge in the back that I eventually set up. And then with that, I was still, like, I still needed boundaries over cooking. Like, I can't be around the smell of, cooking bodies. And so I said, okay, if you're going to cook, chicken or meat, whatever, can you at least let me know so I can step outside? And no, that just wouldn't happen. Like, I remember one time I had just been chopping all my veggies to make a tofu scramble. And out of nowhere, like, my dad's next to me and I like smell like he's about to start cooking meat. And I was like, I was like, what are you doing? Like, I had already made it a conversation multiple times. Like, I don't want to be in the presence of this. And we're literally right next to me. And he was like, oh, well, your brother's hungry and this is what he wants. And so I literally had to step away and I went back to my room. And this isn't in the peak frustration too. That's like already like 3 months of living here and me being like, how am I living here? And then I went back to my room and I was crying. I was like sobbing. I was like, besides like all the ways I was being critiqued for my body and appearance, like now, like even boundaries like around food weren't happening. And so much was being triggered with, previous eating disorders I had in my relationship to food. And here I was like, I don't want to cook next to you because it smells. Or like, I would go buy groceries and feel guilty for spending money on food. It was just too much was coming up at the same time. And yeah, I think that's something that people don't really talk about, like living in highly non-vegan households where also like people don't respect your boundaries. As it's just like an added thing. But it's also like, it's not like, it's been 2 years now of me being vegan and me trying to like show my family like different things you can cook, different things you can eat, and just the constant like, no, this is how it's been, like this is what we're gonna do, blah blah blah. Yeah, eventually, like I always think like, when we used to organize like vegan potlucks and stuff, I always used to think about how I'm never gonna like force anyone to be vegan, obviously. And I was like, and every time I think of like, people are like, oh, but it's because there's so many like angry, like I have angry vegan on my bio because I am an angry vegan. Like I'm angry at like, so many of the injustices, but I'm not going to be the person that tells another person like, don't eat this or eat whatever. And it's because of, like the same with my queerness. Like I felt like I was out everywhere. And the last people I really needed to know and like get that validation from were my parents. And when I came out of my parents and, I got 50-50, the same way with my vegan, it's like I can spend all this energy like trying to like make everyone vegan, but it's like I can't even get my family who have like been my whole life like next to me to understand. And so it's like until I get them anywhere, I don't feel like I can, I'm never gonna like make someone vegan. Like everybody's on their own journey. All I can do is like this is how I live my life. These are my values, and just hope that people can respect that at least.
Yeah,
No.
makes a lot of sense. I mean, we can't control any aspect of anybody's life.
Right. But people get especially protective about food.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very contentious issue right now.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that'll change, when people see more. I mean, the devastation is just right in our face. Climate change,
Mhm.
doing to our health. I mean, just the waste of eggs and where these chickens live for their whole lives. I mean,
Mhm.
but who knows? But thank you. I
Mhm.
don't want to take up too much more of your time because I know we're talking forever. Thank you. This interview has been really wonderful. And you have so much. I mean, there's so many more questions that I could have asked, really a lot. But that's going to have to wait until another time. And I have a feeling maybe somebody will contact you, even me myself, asking, if you want to do another interview. So,
Yeah, I have so many stories. Life has
really,
been a lot.
it's been really nice. Well, I'm going to pause the video and then we can talk.
Mhm.
talk.
Yeah, yeah, of course. All
Thank
right.
you, Alicia.
Of course.